Daniel O'Brien here. Today I'm talking with Bruce Maynard about regenerative agriculture. Thanks for your time today, Bruce.
Good morning to you, Daniel.
So today I wanted to talk about a bit of your journey. Over this I suppose, unofficial series, I have been interviewing people in regenerative agriculture. I've interviewed people in America that grow berries, people in New Zealand with a lot higher rainfall, people in coastal areas of Australia. But please give me a bit of a background of where you're located and I suppose your journey into regenerative agriculture.
Yes, so I'm a fourth generation farmer in central New South Wales between Narromine and Trangie, and so out on the plains where it's traditionally been a mixed farming operation out here, cropping and dryland grazing. And so my journey started in when I returned to the farm in the late 80s, and things were very difficult then with high interest rates and also with the starts of the change in seasons that we're seeing accelerating in more recent times. And so things were tough and difficult, and I really decided as a young man that long term I wanted to make a change in direction. That didn't necessarily mean that that I was throwing out the existing practices, and I always emphasise that. I think we need to continue to learn and keep everything at our disposal, old toolboxes as well as new. And we changed our grazing regime in the early 90s, and that was a big change for us, and that started us on a path of much more diversity. And springing from that over time came the things that we developed here, such as no-kill cropping, stress-free stockmanship, and more recently self-herding. So it's been an amazing and very interesting journey, along with planting lots of trees and shrubs and doing lots and lots of different experiments. We're always experimenting each year, but an enjoyable road, I might suggest, and also one that gives us some hope for the future, even though the parameters in which we are operating now are shifting very, very rapidly.
So in the early 90s, when you changed the way you were what you were doing with livestock or herding, explain what you were doing and then what changes you did make.
Yeah, so we're just traditional graziers with sheep and cattle on the place, with no necessarily fixed grazing approach. We were one of the first to adopt cell grazing and holistic management principles with our grazing, and I became an avid student of all approaches of grazing and all the research, and have remained so ever since. And once again, I'll use that toolbox analogy that all of the grazing approaches have useful tools for people, and at times we will be emphasising one approach rather than the others, and at various other times we'll be using a little bit from each.
Yeah.
And the main thing that a change in grazing regime can give you is an increase in both mass and diversity. And so it's not magic. It's really based on scientific and biological principles. You can trace it right back that if we're utilising our animals in a way that just doesn't leave them totally to occupy the landscape at all times, then that means that we are able to initiate plant growth spurts over and above what would be available if the animals were just allowed to do their own thing. And that led us into all the behavioural work over time about changing animal behaviours and habits in ways to do more with choice rather than force. And so that has been an involvement as well.
Yeah, okay. So before you did the cell grazing, what were you just doing set stocking, or you had a few paddocks? What did it look like before you did the cell grazing?
Yeah, so a mix of both of those things. A lot of set and variable stocking, but continuous stocking, and then some variation and some resting, but not much of a if you like, a set plan, and certainly not not a goal towards diversity. And that's a big key that'll keep on coming back, that the more that we diversify our plants growing, whether that be on the grassland, shrubland, or the tree layer, the broader the cycling we get of all the nutrients and that arrive and are existing on the farm. So in my mind, that is the cheapest long-term approach. We want to try and make sure that we're maximising the biological activity on the place. So therefore, we don't have to buy in externally some things to replace those processes.
Yeah. Okay. So what made the change for you? What made you make the decision to say, hey, I want to put a grazing plan in place? Was it not happy with what you were doing, or you came across some new information? What was the point where you go, hey, I want to do something different here, and why?
Yeah, great question, because it was actually both push and pull factors involved there. It had a genuine interest in working towards production processes that actually kept on regenerating themselves. And so we were an early user of that sort of terminology, because that was our thought process. How do we get things to keep on reutilizing rather than to buy in external inputs and try and minimise that and constrain that off in the long run? And also just on economics, the cost price squeeze will be a continuing factor, at least as far as foreseeable, that in order to still maintain viability, there is still a pressure on keeping a productivity and a price point there that keeps the business viable. So just doing reducing outside inputs and getting less productivity is not a business model that would work. We actually have to emphasise increasing the natural processes so that our business can thrive in the long run. Not an endless growth model by any means. There's diminishing returns from that, but a maximising on a layered basis. So when I'm speaking with landholders and that sort of thing, I think an emphasis that I make is talking about scaling up, not rather than scaling out. Traditionally in conventional agriculture, its scale is usually talked about on the horizontal basis, buying the neighbours out or getting more area.
Yes.
When in fact the long run game is utilising more upwards, and then we are actually utilising more of the solar energy that's hitting us, and moisture that we happen to get, and the underlying resource.
That is a great example of scale up than scale out, because I've probably had my feet in two camps just based on my background. I've got a lot of family, I suppose, out on those western plains, and a lot of the game plan is like, let's get it. When we get a good crop, we can buy out neighbours and we can just get more and more and more land. And then I suppose my journey into regenerative agriculture, I'm seeing people with like less than 50 acres and they're making an incredible amount of money, but they've just got layers. They've got bees and goats and cattle and a market garden and all these different things. And in some of them, they're probably more profitable than the person that's buying another 5,000 acres, another one, because it's a different form of management. And it was hard for me to get my head around, because in my younger day, I did a season on a cattle station that was almost 1 million acres. So you think, oh man, let's just go big and big and big. And now I'm looking at, I don't have a desire to get 1 million acre cattle station. I'd rather get something a whole lot smaller. And as you said, scale up than scale out. So I think just that key for some people. Why are you buying at the neighbour's place? Could you make the same income by doing a better job with what you've got? So I think that's incredible, just that point. So I suppose the next question, when you made the transition to sell grazing, did you have any, I suppose, maybe mindset hang-ups or a doubt of like, well, how is this going to work? Is there going to be more labour going out and moving cows more regularly? What were some of the fears that you had to go, is this going to work? And how did you overcome them, and what were the actual results?
Indeed, yes. So, good question, and those issues are pertinent. They're not just fears that people have; they're practical, logistical questions, indeed. And so, I did a couple of years' research before we actually dived into initiating the practice. So there was a caution there. And largely what I kept on coming across was that in essence the suggested activities out of that approach aligned with biological principles.
Yeah.
So not everything that was taught at that time is relevant now.
Yeah.
Things have changed over this 25 or 30 years from grazing management, and there are still being lessons learned, and that's the way it should be too. Evolution of any particular ideas should be something that we really, really press forward for. We should all be wary about whichever approach in agriculture is seen as here is the way that things are done, and this is the way it will be. That's actually anti-science in my view. I think everything does evolve, and it's not only our practices, but our understanding of the effects of what we're doing. Sometimes we do things out in the natural resource world that we ascribe a theory to, only to later on find that, well, in fact, it was happening, the process was happening in a different way, but the result's what we're after.
Yeah, and it's fantastic this day and age with information, because I know myself, you go back 10 years ago and we had the internet, but it wasn't like it is today. So you'd sort of speak to a few people and go, I've got this idea, let's be an innovator and give it a go. And now we can type it into Google and go, well, there's someone over in Canada that's done that, have a call with them and get some results. So it's one thing marrying the technology with farming, like we're doing right now. We're sharing information so it can be published. I think that's been a game changer for a lot of people. So I suppose I'll take my hat off to you for what you were doing in the early 90s when you just couldn't jump on Google. Google wasn't around for you to say, hey, let's just see who else is doing it. So the time spent for you to research is a lot harder than it is today. Do you think, well, I can just pull up a 50-minute video and in less than an hour I've got my head sort of around the concept. So it is interesting how things evolve and just information channels that evolve that then feeds back into practices for farming.
Very true, and I think a difficulty we do have nowadays with the internet and that sort of thing is this difficulty of echo chambers of like-minded interest. While supremely useful, we do need to all make sure that we dip out of our comfort zone and really seek more widely as much as we can. And there is a role that in my later years now, I've done a lot of natural resource work and go across Australia to try and provide an even-handed judgment and basis and context for people over a range of these approaches and the way that they may be implemented so that it's pertinent for people's individual circumstances, because very often great results somewhere can actually be an inhibitor for good uptake more broadly, because the context being vastly different on, we've mentioned large or small scale is a typical thing. There could be a very, very valuable technique developed by somebody, but it's scale relative. And on the size of a continent like Australia, that particular thing will be wonderfully useful in a number of places, but continent-wide, not so relevant.
Yes.
And then broader things such as grazing management being a classic there, the majority of catchments all around the world are dominated by grazing uses one way or another. So therefore, if we get little improvements on that on a wide range, that is a very, very useful thing to think versus 100% improvement in a small riparian area. So both are valuable, but scale is an important part of it.
Yeah, and it's a good point there. Often, and I was speaking, it was just 2 days ago with an interview with Nick Huggins that I can link to. We're talking about so many, I suppose, let's call them new farmers that are new to farming. They might have just bought a block in the last couple of years. Some of them, they've still got the mindset, like, just give me the answer. They just want, like, well, how many cattle can I put to 50 acres? And they just want the answer, well, you can put 27. Like, and it's like, well, it's not that, because we know in farms, one side of the fence is different to the other side of the fence because they're facing different directions and rainfall, let alone you talk about the next town or next state or something else. So it is very important to realise that we gather the information, but we need to work out what's right for you and your farm, wherever that is, and where your farm's at. As you know, it's going to be different if you've had 30 years of regenerative agriculture on that farm versus you've just bought somewhere that's a dust bowl that's got zero organic matter. So the context is so important, and I hope people just get that point as well, rather than go, well, okay, we'll just get to the point, like, how many cows can I put, or how many sheep can I put to this area? So environment of your environment and your climate with someone's individual farm is so important. I wanted to, yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I agree totally. Yes, and we just have to assist people too to suggest that there are people all too willing, some out there, to provide them with very simple answers, which
yes.
superficially might suit, but long term are not perhaps in their best interests.
Yeah.
So there is a difference between what you want to hear and what you need to know.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. One of the things with yourself, you've planted quite a few trees and shrubs. Please tell me your journey of that. I suppose in mainstream media, we sort of hear plant trees, it's good. And that's sort of about the end of the message, because like on the media spot, they only got the 30 seconds. When did you start planting trees and shrubs, and give me some background of why that is important for what you're doing?
Yes, well, I guess I'm actually a fourth generation tree grower. From our perspective, the parents and grandparents and great-grandparents planted small numbers and quantities of fodder trees, such as currajong trees and so forth, on our place. I extended that program quite significantly and incorporated fodder shrubs, principally old man saltbush, Acacia nummularia, and that has been over the last 30 years. So all sorts of different methods. We've direct seeded trees and shrubs in. We've individually planted some that we've done amenity plantings behind single tree guards. Many others have been quite extensive. We've planted for carbon sequestration, shade and shelter. And so for the myriad of roles, and we've experimented from everything from amenity plantings to forage plantings, even including things such as bizarre as planting types of cactus and that sort of thing. For experimentation. So
wow.
That never stops, and to summarise it very, very briefly, too, the local context, as we mentioned, is critically important.
Yeah.
If people are wanting to start and don't have any knowledge, the first thing I say to anybody is just go for a drive around your local district and have a look at what's on the roadsides, and that, for a start, will tell you something about forage resources for animals, because there'll be plants growing on the roadside that don't exist within the grazed paddocks nearby. Yeah. That's actually telling you, as far as woody vegetation, plants that are suited to your local area, and animals do actually prefer them if they are available. They might not form the base of what you actually grow on your place, but diversity is the spice of production. A little bit of other items there really boosts animal production. One note of caution now is actually that the rapidly changing circumstances as far as our climate shifting beneath our feet, basically. So in many areas, ours included our local assemblage of plant species. We won't be having as much success planting them anymore because the big droughts are just knocking them out.
Yeah,
And
okay.
so we're going to have a view of a degree or two of more arid species than are existing on the place here at the moment if we're planting for years ahead.
Yeah, okay. So when you talk about fodder trees, just so everyone knows, that's livestock food. That's things that your sheep and cattle can go up to and eat. So it's food. Was that
Correct.
the initial motivation for planting trees to plant it as food, or were there other first motivations?
Yes, and certainly in the for the shrub layer, the mid layer, that was very much as a forage first. But the wind reduction and shading are really big implications of putting vegetation across the landscape. A
Yeah.
much bigger issue than would have known 30 years ago. Um,
Yes.
whether we're talking trees or shrubs, you can get a lot of bang for your buck, or actually make your paddocks more desiccated
Mm.
by the way you design out your tree planting program. When that's species related, spacing, direction, thickness of tree belts, all of that goes into what wind flows go across your property, and also the shade flows across your property. So
Yeah. Right.
we can use this tool is not, like most other tools. We can do this very well, or we can do this in a way that actually hurts us. So if just making up a number, if two identical places they each plant 1,000 trees, well, one person might see a great long-term increase in their productivity, and the person next door, laid out a different way, might actually see a decrease.
Mm.
So
And
important knowledge.
is that something that you discovered personally by doing it the wrong way, or more information that you'd gathered by others, I suppose, expert planning for tree planting?
Yes, a combination, definitely. Yep, I've certainly made plenty of mistakes along the road and journey. The basic wind flow information and shading information and that sort of thing is available.
Okay.
Um, but then implementing that in a practical way then actually does require a bit more of a longer conversation, because if we were designing it for yourself or somebody else, well, we really need to know a few other parameters there, rather than just, yes, we can establish a good tree belt that that shelters your livestock and shades some of your pasture. Okay, that's fine, but then we need to do some other things here. Any planting, in my view, should be able to serve multiple purposes, not just block the wind or do shade or provide diversity or forage. We can have all of those things
Yes.
at once if we cleverly do it. But to cleverly do that means that we have to assemble a bit of broader knowledge about the local context,
Yes.
but importantly the goals of the people involved, and the way we might go about establishing that with the species that are locally going to be appropriate and give a commercial payoff. But you can have it all, as long as you plan for it all. But if you're only planning for one or two effects from the trees, well, that can still be more than worthwhile, or shrubs for that matter. But you're missing out on lots of other opportunities, and of course you don't know what you don't know.
That's right. And one of the things with trees, you sort of want to get it right when you plant them. You don't want to decide 5 years later, they're not the easiest things to move. So just on that, that's a very interesting topic. So someone that's listening to just this part of it to go, hey, I do want to put some trees on my farm. I was just going to go buy 400 eucalypts and just pop them wherever. What resources or books or people, where would you encourage someone to go before they go head off to the nursery this afternoon and buy some trees? Where would you send them so they can get that knowledge and plan it out first?
Yes, I think yes, if we could put the brakes on them and say, well, don't go planting this afternoon. Give yourself a few weeks to go and first stop. As far as species go, go and talk to several nurseries, or, of course, if you do happen to see some plantings in your local district, to maybe find out that person who owns that property and give them a call and ask for their experiences in how they established it and what they actually have there. It's often very, very difficult to see the difference between two different species of eucalypt, for argument's sake, but their survivability can be very, very different for both of those. So you need to know, because you could waste all of your money and effort. And thoughts also for truly the economics. You don't have to overdo the analysis, but the back of an envelope will do. But you do have to be serious about are we going to spend a lot of time and money to do individual tree guards, for argument's sake, versus whacking up a fence and having to forego a bit bigger area for a period of a time.
Yes.
But getting a more effectiveness. And so there are a number of those logistical things. And if you were planting, starting 6 or 12 months ahead of time with ripping work or whatever other soil preparation you're going to do, if you're digging individual holes, if you can throw compost or other manure or those sort of things down the bottom of the hole and let everything work at that for 6 or 12 months ahead of time, that gives you a much, much better jump start, because getting those plants through the very, very first tough time, and that's usually associated in Australia with our high evaporation times in our summer times. We need those roots down deep, and that is a big deal. Getting those plants roots down there early and deep gives survivability, and you pay just as much for a live tree as you do a dead one. So I think a little bit of extra work in the beginning is very much more rewarding for you, and gives long-term resilience.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. No, you're right there when you say it's a lot more rewarding, because they're going to put in a lot of effort anyway. Like, even if they just went out there and dug some holes, and that emotional toll on you if you went back days, weeks or months later to see a whole bunch of them dead, it does take a bit out of you, no matter how strong you are. So yeah, but before people go planning, let's do some research, speak to some locals, and look up some resources to say, how do I plan out my farm? And there are experts in certain areas that you can probably pull in or get books on that. So
yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's lots of archived good practical sort of fact sheet type advice from bodies such as Greening Australia and Landcare and so forth. There's been a lot of trial work done variously over various places, so those practical examples that you can read up from other people's on-ground experience are very useful.
Yeah. So tell me, the quality and production from your cattle, say in 1990, before you started implementing trees and shrubs, fodder, the cell grazing, to where we are now, where you've got a certain element of established, and as we did say, you're always improving and always going to the next level. How does the production of your cattle look from what it did in 1990 to where you are now, and your farm, not just your cattle?
Yes, it changed quite dramatically, and the number of things that you've identified there all interlinked to that effect, along with the behavioural work. So it basically quadrupled from our long-term historical average. But I do need to hasten to add that with the changing climate, we've actually gone into reverse, even with the best of our intentions and hard work to broaden out our vegetation base, which we've successfly done. The climate is impacting and bringing down that high peak where we were up to. So this is prior to the millennium drought in the over sort of a 15-year period, we quadrupled our stocking rate from where it was traditionally, and safely so.
Yes.
We kept on having a burgeoning of diversity and mass of plants. We weren't at the upper limit, but that was in the context of that climate parameters. Now we're dealing with much less. So many of the plants that we've planted over this time now are currently dying in the extreme conditions that we have now. So we're seeing lots and lots of our shrubs and trees that we've planted over the decades, and in fact some of them that go back to the 3 generations before me are actually dying through a lack of moisture. And while disappointing, we have to be accepting that is a new reality.
Yes, and adapt to the conditions that you have, no matter where it's you or wherever you're located. Farm to the conditions. So you've implemented tree planting, cell grazing. What were some other things you've implemented that you have been a bit of a game changer, or something that you want to talk about?
Yes, well, one thing we developed here on the place after our shift to diversified grazing was the no-kill cropping method, which sows crops into established grasslands without simplifying them. So we did get to a fork in the road where we had been doing direct drilling and reduced amounts of chemical usage with our cropping program for 10 years. But in the mid-90s, we had to make a decision that our grazing was leading to higher diversity, but then we were taking it back to ground zero with a cropping phase. And so there was that decision, and I decided we were going to go for maximum diversity. So we sold all our big farming gear, sort of burned our bridges properly behind us, and then initiated this no-kill cropping, which not to be confused with no-till. It's not a chemical-based approach, and in fact, it's a big divergence from all other cropping methods. That it's a non-simplifying method. So if you think about how crops are done traditionally, whether it be from the scale of a backyard vegetable patch to large broadacre, it's usually about simplifying the growing area and then planting single or at most a few multiple species. And so no-kill is about retaining the whole amount of grassland function there by retaining all the plants that are existing in that grassland, and then adding a crop in amongst that. So that was an important development, and made another big beneficial change on our stock performance, because you can imagine we're actually putting a low toxin, high nutrient plant in amongst a great swathe of 100 other species. So there's some of those species in there less preferred on their own by the animals, because they might be a higher toxin, a lower nutrient. But of course, if we're putting something that is high nutrient, low toxin right side by side, they can utilise more of something that they wouldn't be utilising otherwise. So it provides an opportunity to expand the grazing even more than just the grazing strategies alone. It's a diet diversity question here that we're actually providing and building more organic matter, and by increasing the amount of mass, we've done the experimentation, apply it or don't apply it. With no-kill, you'll grow 30 to 40% more material depending upon the seasonal events that you have, by the addition of this. And that would be okay in of itself, but the really great key about no-kill, it's with a tiny usage of external inputs. So it's only a fraction of the fossil fuel usage and no external fertilizers to get that sort of result. And in fact, we've even done some experimentation along with others driving with solar-powered battery vehicles and do the sowing. So then you're really off the fossil fuel treadmill. And the grain that's reaped off that too, think about how it's fundamentally different than standard cropping approaches, because not being grown in monoculture means that the product, the same as the animal that comes off it, is so incredibly more diverse than when it's grown in monoculture. And so this is a beyond organic type, if you like, implication for humans and animals here. If we grow things in a really super diverse way, then the end products are not nearly the same as if we grow them in the simplified way. And so no-kill cropping, the grain off that, we haven't been able to initiate enough research here to sort of put hand on the heart and tell you of all of the characteristics, but we know for sure that the vast range of phytochemicals in those grains will be much broader than grown in a monoculture.
So when you're sowing that, how are you sowing? You're sowing it into, I suppose, other pasture. How are you sowing that? Are you flicking out the seed, or you're putting it under the ground? How are you actually sowing that?
Yes, we're sowing it in a very small slot with coulter disc equipment. So I'm using my hands here to illustrate that we've got round coulter discs that are just cutting through the landscape. They're not dragging. So it's not tillage. It's actually just a micro incision of seed just below the ground. And importantly, dry, not wet. So here is a key distinction between other cropping methods in the past. If you go wet sowing with any traditional cropping method, you have to do something about weeds because they have had the head start. If you dry sow and place the seed there, then it actually gets the head start. And with no-kill, that's the only advantage that we're giving our plants at all. And they have to battle after that in amongst a huge variety of 100 or more other plants existing of all sorts of different types that are ebbing and flowing in a natural grassland. And so it's thinking about it this way: we're putting our annual weed that we like, that us humans want, in amongst a grassland, and the growing and coming and going of annuals in a grassland is a totally biologically natural thing to happen. So we are using a tiny bit of input as far as effort and technology to go and get that annual plant that we prefer, to give a huge wide range of implications here, because apart from the dietary bit, we've talked about the animals, which of course means that the animal products are different too. The grain products are different, but also it means that we can start up processes of initiating more organic matter on places and doing repair in a much faster way than if we were just utilising grazing approaches alone. So it's really a state and transition switch. Sometimes things can progress, but they can get actually capped at a certain point to not break out, or that hard to break out. By application of no-kill and growing more material, you can actually break state and initiate a great deal more of activity and diversity, because of course you're not taking away any of the pieces that are already there, which is a really important point. So we're maximising, coming back to this point of vertical scale, we're maximising the vertical scale usage of our base resource, of our soil.
Yeah.
by not ever taking away plants, but actually initiating activities on top which help our business and the overall solar capture.
Yeah.
We utilise more and more of the underground resource, and you've got all sorts of cycles happening there because every plant brings different nutrients at different times from different depths to the soil surface.
Yeah. So when you talk about it as cropping, how are you harvesting this cropping? I'm guessing you're doing that with the livestock to feed it off, opposed to a header, or tell me how you're harvesting it.
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, both. Yeah, and so it's a great liberation too because of its ultra low cost.
Yeah.
People, the decision of harvesting, whether they use 4-footed harvesters or rubber-tired harvesters,
Yeah.
is totally up to the individual, and that's another great freedom of it, and also helpful for those people that don't have a lot of scale as far as countryside goes.
Okay.
Low investment means that the choice remains there for yourself, and this is one of the Achilles heels of modern conventional cropping. The costs of inputs are so high now that they must drive towards a high grain yield.
Yes.
There is no other game. If you put plenty of money on the table, you've got to get that paid back.
Yeah.
So therefore, that continues to drive people towards simplification of systems to drive ever more producing of stuff in a more monocultural and more nutrient lessening effect, because we're just diluting the amount that we're producing off any set area in order to make the economics work and the conventional. And here is a break. If we do it very, very cheaply, then the freedom and choice starts residing back with the farmer rather than just the market.
Yeah. So with the like I don't come from a grain background, but I've had like a tiny bit to do with it. So I understand when a header comes through, it's going to take, let's say, the top off wheat or whatever. How does that work? If you've sown the wheat into pasture, the wheat's growing up, the pasture's growing up, what does it look like for the header? Because I'm guessing it's picking up more than just wheat. Talk me through that.
Indeed, yes. And once again, it's actually an advantage. There can be difficulties at harvest time if you have a very wet spring in the Australian context, that we've got the ripe crop material, and then we have green material emerging up through it. That doesn't tend to happen all the time. It does happen, but it's infrequent in the cropping zones. But certainly can be an issue. The modern machinery of is quite able to cope with that much better than the older style machinery. But that extra material, because you'll have, even if you don't have green material there, you'll have other dead grown material from other annuals and perennials in there. That's a super valuable feed source. So typically for us, when we harvest it, we'll harvest it and then do a secondary separation afterwards.
Okay.
So re-winnowing the grain, but the seconds material is incredibly valuable, and the animals really like it because, of course, it's so diverse.
Yes.
It's not like a standard amount of chaff that comes off a regular conventional cropping field that is just only wheat alone and chaff. That secondary separation gives you a super high value feed stuff that you can use. It's bulky, but it's once again another little advantage if you choose to use it that way.
And how do you use that? Like, how long do you store it for? How do you feed it out? How do you use it?
Right, we've just remained fairly conventional with that. We've been doing work with cooperative, the Constructive Farming Cooperative, where we've developed up a system for people to form their own mini cooperatives to actually institute no-kill cropping under the banner of grassland grain, so that people can actually start getting some provenance pricing for the grains they produce in their local area.
Okay.
So if they institute no-kill, and produce grain in their local area, that will be vastly different than the grain I can produce on my place. It's going to start reflecting the characteristics that we see commonly referred to in wine growing and that sort of thing, that different areas produce very, very different qualities of material, and not necessarily better or worse, but just very different.
Yes.
And so it can be with the grain. That's a great opportunity there for, once again, for small people to get involved in the grassland grain system, which actually assists them through the first few years as they transition, but to do it as a small cohesive group that can sell their produce. And once again, importantly, with total individual choice there. They're not locked into the usual business model, which is, join the cooperative or sign up with a company, and then you're locked in and you've got to provide your stuff. No, in this model, it's you're totally available to do whatever you like with your produce. You're not locked in. It's a collaborative approach, but not a modern business model that way. But it allows people to potentially make significantly more money because it's a differentiation of grain, whereas at the moment, essentially, grains remain totally bulk commodity.
Yeah, that's right. And it's great, like we were talking before, that the technology and communication with the internet, you can actually say, hey, I do have grain and this is how it's different. And what I'm finding fascinating recently is how many people, and maybe it's more on the coastal thing, but they're selling their cattle through like Gumtree or Facebook Marketplace or something. And I'm seeing more of that rather than them paying for transport, send it off to the sale yards, hoping there's some good buyers there on the sale yards, paying all the commission and all the freight and everything else and getting the check so long later. They can put up, I'm selling a couple of bulls, and it's just straight, it's more local. People are buying more local, and I think it's better for everyone. They can talk directly to the farmer, see what farm it's come from, see who you're selling it to. So I think it's a great initiative. As you said, by keeping it sort of local, then we aren't just putting grain on a truck and sending it. Oh, I don't even want to talk about how many hours, like, as we both know, grain and hay can sit on trucks for hours, like days, to just move around this big country. So I think that's fantastic that, keep it local and market it as a local product. Tell me, what do you do with the seconds? So you said you've got this, I suppose, diverse chaff. Do you feed that back to your cattle? Do you store that? Do you eat it straight away? What do you do with the seconds that are actually quite valuable?
Yes, we feed that out pretty soon. Storage of that material can be problematical because it's a wonderful spot for insects to have a great feast on, because it's diverse and lightly packed with lots and lots of vegetable matter. So it generally goes out straight away, and then grain can be stored for a longer period of time. And once again, broadening it out from just our operation. Well, if people are considering these lines, they can make their own choices what they wish to do. It can be used as a valuable grain assist, whether we're talking about the grain itself or the seconds. But importantly, we've produced it in the least cost model as well.
Yes.
Which, if you do go and harvest it, essentially your cost basis is that sowing usually only about 1/10 of what conventional is. And then you have a standard harvesting cost, right, which is there, but you're only going to incur that cost if you have the product there to actually go and harvest. So it provides you with a total freedom to make your own calculations in any year, because it varies. Are we going to use the animals even if the crop has completely gone to head and to maturity? If the mathematics are there that the dollars work out better to put the animals in, it's wonderful to not be committed to harvesting it by machine.
Yeah, and you've got that choice. And I suppose the example of that, if someone's doesn't have full context of this, if you've got a farm of 10,000 acres and you've got no livestock and you've only got tractors and headers, you might not have that choice because you can't just pull your cattle in because you don't own cattle. So, yeah, by having that choice, as you said, it's sort of the cost-benefit analysis to go, I can put the header on it or I can put the cattle on it, what's going to work out better? Again, as you said, it's back to choice, which is actually control of you're managing. You've got control of what's happening here. So that's great.
Yeah, indeed, yes. Putting it back so that a farmer, Jack or Jane, whoever they are,
Yeah.
are able to make decisions that best fit their parameters rather than being boxed in by the outside influences. Yeah. And on the just referring back to the grazing side, you think about the implementation of this across a whole farm basis. If we're growing considerable more amounts of dry matter in our across our place, not necessarily across the whole place, but it affects the whole grazing plan and what you can do in terms of giving some other areas more extended rest, or leaving more material to carry forward into other times. It affects positively the whole grazing plan for you throughout the year.
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much for your time today, Bruce. We've covered some very fascinating things, and you've clearly got a lot of experience of the journey of what you've done. So hopefully this has provided some value and inspiration to people that are like, I want to get started in regenerative agriculture. Where can I go? So here are some real life examples. So thank you again for your time today, Bruce.
Pleasure to be with you, Daniel, and cheers to all.
Thank you.